What were the key social and musical factors in Seattle that gave rise to this genre people call grunge?
So it's different where, like when Seattle, what do you mean by Seattle? Because the Seattle quote unquote music scene had really three hubs: Aberdeen, Hoquiam in
Mhm.
the Olympic Peninsula. That's where famously Nirvana, but also really crucially the Melvins were from. They were from Montesano, so Montesano, Aberdeen, Hoquiam area. There's the Olympia scene organized
Mhm.
around Evergreen State College and K Records. There's even a minor little Tacoma thing. Chris Novoselic lived in Tacoma actually for a time. And then there's the Seattle scene, which could be broadly divided into two divisions. You have the Seattle proper, which is more punk, more arty, even though there was metal there. And but then you have really the East Side metal scene, Bellevue area,
Mhm.
where like sort of wailing guitars. So when you're talking about the different factors that shaped each of these different things, particularly when we're talking about the Aberdeen Montesano Hoquiam fact, it's the decline of timber beginning in the 1950s, 1960s, that really immiserates the region. When we're talking about Seattle, it's the decline of Boeing in the 1970s, and the failure of timber, broadly speaking, as well, shaped it, but a little less directly than it did in the Olympic Peninsula. And it essentially creates economic crisis throughout the region. You get cheap rents. You get people being able to actually pursue lives as artists because the rent is cheap. You also get the particular tone of Seattle, the rain, the dreariness, and I'm going into this more in this podcast that I'm doing on the indigenous history of the region and the fact that it was one of the last to be colonized and sort of the darkness of the region itself, which all comes together to create grunge. This movement in the 70s and the 80s of mostly disaffected Gen X kids.
Do you guys think that it's helped also by the fact that because are you still in the Northwest,
Hmm.
Danny?
I'm in Seattle right now.
As a touring musician, a lot of people don't know this. Um, you don't go to Seattle, and if you live in Seattle, you're stuck in Seattle. The biggest city east of you is Minneapolis. The biggest major metropolitan city east of you is Minneapolis, and the biggest city south of you is going to be is San Francisco. Portland is
Right.
still is a B market actually. A lot of people don't
At the time,
realize
yeah.
that.
It was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's more people in
developed since
Portland
then.
now, but it's still not really.
What are you talking about? The wipers. Courtney Love is from Portland, I believe. But no, absolutely, the isolation of Seattle was certainly important because it allows a type of musical culture to develop over time. And it's not just it's the broad Pacific Northwest. Like for example, Tad.
Yeah.
If you know Tad was from Idaho. Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam was from Montana. A bunch of people come up from Portland, etc. And so, particularly in the 70s and the 80s, that isolation was more meaningful than it is today in the era of the internet and cell phones. So you do have a musical culture. And a big other thing is that bands would oftentimes not always come to Seattle.
Yeah.
It was on the West Coast line. Maybe you would go to San Francisco, and then if you're going north, you're doing Portland, Seattle, Vancouver. Not every
Mhm.
band would do that. They didn't have the money necessarily. They didn't have the time. But when like Black Flag comes in the
Yeah.
80s, like everyone will see them.
Yeah.
So I think that also creates like a sense of community. And so this isolation does foster itself to a sense of community. But then also you have the various perversions of the community where like, Kurt Cobain being mean to Pearl Jam, for example, these various small divisions that become large when you have these small communal structures.
Conan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the world I came up in obviously is much different because it literally came afterwards. So it became like, oh, those are the places you want to play because those are the people that have like-minded sensibilities to what you're doing. But it was very clear to me the commodification of everything happened very quickly, and that's something that if you talk to people in this, when I talk on Protonic Reversal about it, I talk about it as being the gold rush, right? And it's like this rare moment where they let in the freaks. And they didn't really know what to do about it. They're like, oh, always need like more of these kinds of bands. So they would give anybody a chance. They're like, well, let's just throw it against the wall and see what sticks. Something that we've never seen since then from a corporate standpoint. But the reason why it worked because there were so many great bands. I'm glad Danny mentioned Tad, one of my favorites, one of the most underrated bands of that whole scene. But
All-time record name, God's Balls.
God's Balls is amazing.
All-time record name. Tad got really fucked over by the rights issues of the cover of their second album.
Right.
I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, they did like like their major label
Just
maybe, I
Pepsi.
think it was their second. Yeah. And so like they really got fucked over by that. Like they were sued into oblivion, and I think it really affected the band.
Well, and we were talking about right before you came on, before the show started, that one of the things I think was so weird about the Tad story. Yeah, there's a documentary about it too, but I had him on the show and talked about it. The show, of course, being Protonic Conversal, my show. I mean, they really pushed the like, oh, this is a crazy looking woodsman with a chainsaw like image. And it's like, this guy's like a poet. Like this guy's like a gentle soul who just like likes playing music, and they pushed that image so hard because the UK press was just eating it up. They were like, "Oh, that's great, we love that. Yeah, that sounds great." They're these like crazy like Sasquatch looking monsters from like the Pacific Northwest.
But that was
like
a smart. I mean, Sub Pop is really, and this is the record label that did it, founded by Jonathan
Sub Pop, yeah.
Poneman and Bruce Pavitt. I think that was a really smart move. Like
at the time, but they never got out of it because of the lawsuits with the dyspepsy, and then there was the 8-Way Santa original artwork that was found.
But I mean the sort of marketing it to the UK, like elite UK rock press, as sort of it was so smart. Like that really got them on the sort of Seattle scene on the radar. I can understand why if you're in a band that you might resent that, particularly like Tad, if you're not like that personally, like the famous Tad picture with the chainsaw. And he was also from Idaho. I'm not even sure he's from timber country. So that was
exactly
different. But it was like a marketing tool, and like it was Pavitt and Poneman are obvious marketing geniuses. Even though Sub Pop was like financially not great, maybe they weren't the best financial business owners, and they would admit as much. But in terms of marketing, they really knew the indie world, they really knew the indie music scene, and they were very successful in elevating the Seattle scene as opposed to the Minneapolis scene where the Replacements came from, or Ohio scenes or whatever. I think like a lot of the success of Seattle per se came from Sub Pop, and that's why they're really the only iconic indie label from the 80s and 90s. I don't think Epitaph. I don't think. They're at the Seattle airport. I was going to bring that up too. I don't think Discord. I don't think these labels have like the cultural presence of Sub Pop, and obviously that's mostly due to Nirvana. But it was good also due to the gene.
Yeah, Sub Pop store in the airport where you could like buy like a Big Muff pedal if you felt so inclined. Yep. Or like me, if you forgot to bring shirts for a trip, you could buy a Mudhoney shirt so you have something to wear.
But do you think though that there's this short moment in the industry's history where this time in the 90s you can be a small label, and if you are pretty good, right? Because Discord.
Yeah, you can live a middle class life is how I think about it, like for real, in a way that you really, really can't today.
Kill Rock Stars, K, Homestead's another good example. Touch and Go, Amphetamine Reptile, so on and so on.
What's the name of? I can't think of the name of the label out of Berkeley where Green Day comes. Lookout.
Yeah, who also have a store, but it's not an airport.
No.
But I think like kind of I want to tag on Danny's point that something that people forget, because I think it's hilarious, is that there was the manufactured world of grunge kind of took on its own boulder rolling down the hill sensibility to the fact that people would literally throw out disinformation. Like Megan Jasper was asked about, can you tell us some?
The New York Times thing, yeah.
This grunge slang, and she's made up a bunch of crazy stuff like swinging on the flippity flop.
Yeah, that's the one I always remember too. It means hanging out, like swinging on the flippity flop, and it's like your bean is your hat or whatever it is.
Lame stains
like so
is good. Yeah,
that's so Gen X. Like that article, and that story is like the most Gen X story of all time.
Oh, 100%.
It's so funny, and that's what I like about grunge. It's like mega Gen X. It's like the last time people had hope, and to my mind the grunge movement is really the end of rock music. I think the sort of Strokes as a major cultural force, that's all I mean. Like obviously rock music continues to be produced, but as being synonymous with pop music, I think the rap and R&B replaced it by 1997, 98. Clear Channel, definitely the sort of consolidation of Clear Channel definitely makes pop as big as possible. And I would say like the Strokes, that shit was a dead cat bounce, as they say in finance. Like the cat had already hit the ground. It just bounced up a little.
Because it became manufactured pop groups, it became like.
Hold on, guys. Can I ask this question? Because you motherfuckers have been talking over me. Jesus Christ.
Whose show was this?
I knew what I was asking.
Don't be a lame stain.
I knew what I was asking when I put Danny Bessner and Conan Neutron on the same.